Hello, I'm Micah Woods, and this is the ATC Double Cut. Sometimes I talk about turfgrass issues just by myself, just do a monologue about something that I've written about on the ATC blog, giving that content the double cut treatment. But today, I am excited to have a guest on the show, and today's guest is Jim Huntoon, the golf course superintendent at Heritage Club in South Carolina. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut, Jim.
Thank you, Mike. Very glad to be here. It's a pleasure to log in with you from Pawleys Island, South Carolina.
Well, I am in Bangkok at the moment, and we're on opposite sides of the world, and it's really cool how this technology allows us to talk about turfgrass issues and golf course maintenance and turfgrass management. And so we can share information and learn from each other. And then also we get to share this information with people around the world. It's an amazing world that we live in these days.
I agree. I agree. It is. It's really opened a lot of avenues of learning that were not available in the past.
Now, I saw that Hurricane Ian, which went through Florida, then went up right through your area. Did the eye pass anywhere near to where you were, and what was the damage like in your area?
It did. It technically landfall, according to the National Hurricane Center, was about 15 miles south of here. But as you know, hurricanes are large. The eye did pass pretty close to directly over us. Micah, it was, if you want to really break it down into meteorological terms, the storm had kind of taken a post-tropical form before it hit us. There wasn't a true eye anymore. It was disorganized. And I guess they were saying it was more of a nor'easter type storm than a pure tropical hurricane. So there wasn't a true eye where the sun came out and all that kind of stuff. We've been through that here as well. But yes, it did go right over us. There was a period of calming. And the impacts were here at the golf course were pretty minimal. We had 50-mile-an-hour winds, 55 gusts maybe, sustained winds 30 to 40 miles an hour probably for a 2-hour period, and a 12-hour period of breezy conditions that put down a lot of debris. There's a lot of old trees on this golf course, and they produce a lot of pine cones and sticks and acorns and Spanish moss. So a lot of debris pickup, and thankfully no major tree loss. A few large limbs, a couple trees snapped in half. Stuff like that, but nothing major. Now the island, Pawleys Island on the ocean front here, suffered pretty substantial damage from the storm surge. It was, in relation to the force of the winds, it was much more like a Cat 3 or a Cat 4 type surge that we had here. And a lot of damage up there. The dunes have been decimated and a lot of flooding and that kind of stuff. So there are golf courses in this area and in the Myrtle Beach area that are close to the ocean that did suffer from the surge and, had greens and fairways that were inundated and covered with salt water from the surge, Micah.
Ooh, yeah, that's not a it's not a good situation. It's those kind of storms are, it's a lot of work to repair the damage that happens. So yeah, I mean, I want to say that it's in compared to how it could have been. I'm glad to hear that you just suffered some debris, a lot of debris damage, but not too many trees down or anything like that. And you didn't have too much rain with it.
We had 6 inches of rain over about a 18-hour period, but we've been very dry. So it really soaked it up. And I think that mitigated some of the tree damage. I've gone through other storms, Hurricane Matthew in 2016, where we were excessively wet and, we had 50 trees that were just toppled over because of the wetness. So that worked in our favor. The flooding went out as fast as it came in. The ground did soak up a lot, and I think the fact that where we got hit with the eye mitigated the wind some too. I know maybe 50 miles north of here in North Myrtle Beach, they had stronger hurricane force winds and tree. I've heard of golf courses up that way that have, a lot of tree damage and everything. So with these tropical systems, it's you just don't know until they go through. You can get spared sometimes, and other times you think you're okay, and you really get slapped. It's as good as they've gotten with the technology and the forecasting. It's still you just have to go through it.
Yeah, I've experienced that in Japan and in the Philippines. And sometimes when the trees go down, it's hard to predict just what the winds are going to do. And I think it must depend on things that I haven't studied and don't understand. But things you mentioned, maybe the soil moisture at the time, how wet the soils are at the time that the peak winds are coming through, may have something to do with it. And yeah, I just know from a golf course maintenance perspective, it's a lot of work to clean up. And it's not like you suddenly have a lot of extra labor and a lot of extra people and machines helping out.
No, no, we
And you
have.
still have the same regular work to do. And then now you have all this extra cleanup. So I
Yeah,
was
it's
I was
kind of.
certainly thinking of you and the superintendents in Florida and in Georgia and the Carolinas last week when that happened.
Yeah, it's we didn't get anything here like they got down in Southwest Florida. That's catastrophic damage there. But it's yeah, this is a time of year when we're trending down with labor, so that makes it more difficult. Thankfully, it's cooler now, and the grass is not growing very much, so mowing isn't as huge of an issue. And the cleanup process, Micah, is I kind of equate it to like a core aeration cleanup process or healing. You can a lot of times you can after a week after coring the greens, you can get them 80% back to where they were. Well, that last 20% can take 3 weeks though, and that's kind of like the hurricane cleanup. We've got most of it cleaned up. We blown everything, and we've put the bunkers back and getting back to normal. But the last 20% of cleanup, in the beds and around the clubhouse and just all that kind of stuff, it just drags out over a long period of time.
I understand. Now, I follow you on Instagram and on Twitter. I've seen some of the photos. I think you had some free Spanish moss available that you'd blown up. And if anybody wanted to collect that, I think I saw that one on Instagram. And I've put up on the screen here your handle, which is the same on Instagram and Twitter. It's at Huntoon JMSC. So anybody that doesn't follow Jim, do that, and you'll get plenty of good photos and how would you describe it? Photos of golf course maintenance activities.
Sure. Just I don't tend to post a lot on Twitter. I tend to be more active on Instagram. I like to use the stories. I stumbled upon that many years ago and kind of stuck with it. I've always been a person that likes to take pictures and photographs and save them for archives and use them for learning and informational purposes. So it just fit right in. So it's just more of a story of my life, I guess, Micah, as it says. And golf course maintenance and golf courses is certainly a big part of that.
Now, on the weather topic, let's segue or transition into the blog post that we can give the ATC double cut treatment today, which is also on a weather topic, and it's frost delays. And this is something that I've written about quite a bit on the ATC website over the years. And I wrote a blog post in September that has the title An Alternative Reference for Frost Delays. Now, if you're listening to this, I will put a direct link to this blog post in the show notes so you can check it out, and it has some interesting links. And the first link that I put is the standard reference that I recommend, which is Pace Turf's Clubhouse Edition on why frost delays are necessary. And that is the standard type of reference about that explains what can happen and how to eliminate any risk from frost damage. And the way to eliminate any risk from frost damage is to not put traffic on frosted turf. And I wrote in the blog post, I said, if that's what you want to do, then that's the only guide you'll need. But if you want to be adventurous, read on. And then I went on to explain some things that we'll talk about. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this post with you, Jim, is because after I posted it, or after I'd reshared Paul McCormick's tweet, Paul McCormick from Prince Edward Island in Canada had posted a tweet, and he said that this morning we tried an alternate approach to their first frost of the season, and he tagged me in that, and he'd said that they went ahead and allowed some traffic or did some traffic over frosted rough. And you'd sent me a direct message on Twitter and said, you know, Micah, I'm paraphrasing here, but you said something like in the Myrtle Beach area, there's been some places that have allowed traffic on frosted turf for many years. And I thought, okay, here's somebody who, like me, has seen both sides of frost delays, and I wanted to talk with you and find out what people do in the Myrtle Beach area, and just explain what I wrote about in this blog post to perhaps a wider audience. Have you had a frost yet this year? It's early October. Probably no
No.
frost in South Carolina yet. When would you typically get a frost in that area?
Average frost day here, I believe, is November 11th historically.
Okay, so you're
So,
1 month away from the time that we're recording this.
yep.
And and at your golf course at Heritage Club, uh, are you Bermuda grass on all surfaces?
We are Bermuda grass on all surfaces, except we do have zoysia grass tees on some holes in shade situations.
And when you get that first frost, I presume the grass is going to be well on its way to dormancy, so probably you wouldn't need to be rushing to get mowers out or anything, would you?
No, no, it'll be, the first frost we're going to typically get here are going to be in the rough only. They're not going to be on the shortcut. Um, those will come more in December and January. But
And and you're a
yeah,
private, are you a private members facility or
no,
hybrid?
we're semi private. We do have members. There's a large community around the golf course, and we have about 175 members. But we're also, like every other course, it's not fully private in the Myrtle Beach area. We're driven by resort play and local play as well. It's really a combination of everything, Micah.
So
So we're in a situation too with similar to what you mentioned in the blog post about in Asia and Japan, where revenue is important, and it really is something that has to be weighed with the delay.
So, because I think of something in the American context, it may be a Saturday morning in November, for example, and there may be a football game at 1 o'clock that somebody wants to make sure that they get to that football game, and they may have a tee time at 8 a.m. or 8:30 a.m., and they could go from the golf course straight to after they finish their round, they could go to the football game, or they want to go to a social event where they'll watch the football game on a weekend. And if they're held up because of a frost delay for 30 minutes or for an hour or for 90 minutes, that could throw their football schedule on that Saturday into disarray. And, you know, what do you do at the club? Would you hold people for a frost delay, or just say we're happy to take your money and go on out and have a good time?
Well, it's a game time decision, to use the football reference. It depends, as you know. Not all frosts are created equal. there's different levels of frosted turf, and um, we plan on teeing off a little bit later in the wintertime to mitigate it somewhat. It's really about looking at the sheet, looking at the tee sheet, and seeing how many players we have, and the amount of daylight that we have. Because obviously, in here in the warmer climates during the winter, when you're playing golf throughout the winter, the days are much shorter, so you have to keep that in the back of your mind. Here in our area, you can't. It gets dark at 5:30 throughout most of the winter, so it's a balancing act. You have to look at the tee sheet, who's playing, how can they be compressed into a certain window. I know, Micah, a lot of times when we have heavy frost delays and freezing situations, we may go ahead and plan a shotgun start to get all the players out after all the frost is gone. But then other times we do let them play on frosted conditions. Never when it's on the greens, but the rough, I don't really worry about, especially after it's achieved full dormancy. The fairways, same thing. We don't overseed this course. We're one of the very few in Myrtle Beach that doesn't. So obviously we have a Bermuda grass canopy that we're trying to protect to get us through February and March, which are busy, busy times for us when the grass is obviously not grown all winter and is at its bottom. So I take that into consideration. We paint the fairways here, and we do that in the frost to improve the efficacy of the paint. So it just really depends. And I'm careful with the fairways in the fall because I don't want to have a lot of traffic on them with frost because, again, they're still not hardened off yet, Micah. So it's a balancing act. It's very variable, and it just depends on the frost, the time of year, and how many players we have.
That sounds like a reasonable approach. I'd like to ask about the type of damage you've seen. Have you ever, a 12 hours later, or 24 hours later, or 72 hours later, seen damage on the course and said, "Man, I wish I didn't allow that traffic"?
I have not, but full disclosure, 10 years ago, 13 years ago, when I first became a golf course superintendent, I wasn't as lenient on this because I didn't have as much experience, and I was just following the standards of frost delays. And I think as time's gone on, you learn that there probably isn't as much potential for damage. I can't really think of any time where I've personally seen damage on my golf course for allowing it. We do a little bit of overseeding on tees, and I can think of a situation last winter when I sent somebody out mowing tees in the morning with a triplex mower, and sometimes the frost doesn't develop until after daybreak. You can go out there and try to evaluate and think, okay, I don't think we're going to have any, and it can fool you. And I know a situation where I sent somebody out to mow, and we got fooled, and the ryegrass tee was full of frost, and he mowed the entire tee, Micah, with ice crystals falling off the rollers, and I saw nothing. But I also know other courses here in Myrtle Beach that have ryegrass collars and will mow the greens while there's ryegrass frosted in the collars, and you can see the tire tracks where the grass breaks from the frost. I'm assuming that's just the tips of the grass wilting. You would know better than I, scientifically or morphologically what's happening there, but it's pretty much gone after a day or so. So I can't say where I've seen a lot of damage. I think there is potential for damage when the greens get frozen, though. That's a whole different topic.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing this with me because like you, when I was a golf course superintendent, I took the very traditional approach. What I had learned working at golf courses in Oregon and then working in Georgia, at those places where I'd worked, where in the winter when we did have frost, it was no maintenance staff on the course, and nobody off the cart path, no vehicles off the cart path, and certain in terms of maintenance work, and no golfers on the course at all until the course was deemed frost free and ready to play. And when I was a golf course superintendent in Shanghai, that was the policy that I implemented without ever thinking about it, because I just assumed that if we put traffic on frosted turf, in that case it was all cool season grass in Shanghai, I expected that there would be damage, and I didn't want any damage, so we never tested it. I never deliberately put maintenance traffic on frosted turf, and we certainly didn't allow any golfing traffic on frosted turf. And I went to Japan to be a golf course superintendent in September of 2000, and we had our first frost in November that year, I believe. And there in Japan, it was Tifway 419 on the tees and fairways, which we overseeded with perennial ryegrass. The roughs were Zoysia japonica, and the greens were creeping bentgrass. And I remember getting a phone call, and I'd only been in Japan for a couple of months, so my Japanese skills were limited to say the least. And I got a phone call from the clubhouse, where you know, I tried to say that the course was closed now, and they've got a bunch of golfers up there ready to play, and they're trying to convey to me that the owner wants us to allow the golfers to play. And I didn't understand how it worked in Japan. It turns out in Japan, they don't really do frost delays. And that was something that was completely new to me, because I was coming from a background where I fully expected that we would protect the turf by not allowing any traffic. And in Japan, that was not really the way that it worked. And that was a wake up call for me. And I put in writing, I was trying to make my objection to traffic on frosted turf known to everybody, to my boss and to the golf course owner and to everybody, that I did not condone that practice. And I and the maintenance team were not going to be responsible for any damage that might happen. Well, it turned out we did thousands of rounds on frosted turf, including traffic on frosted bentgrass and traffic on frosted, overseeded tees and fairways. And the damage was minimal. And by springtime, everything was completely normal. And so that's something that I just remember how surprised I was, both that people were allowed to play on frosted turf, and secondly, I was really surprised at how well the golf course handled it, how good the turf was in the spring after all that play on frosted turf. And I've subsequently done the math and realized that was about, what was it, $1 million of green fee revenue that they did, that we would have disrupted if we did not allow that. So I can understand why the owner wanted to let people play, because we were a daily fee golf course and people were out there paying somewhere in the range of $100 per round. So, every tee time was $400+. And because I was aware of that, and that practice continues to this day at many golf courses, at hundreds or thousands of facilities in South Korea and in Japan. And because I'm aware of this, sometimes I see the tweets or the articles about how precious we need to be about frost delays, and how indignant golf course superintendents should be if any golfer dares set foot on frosted turf, and how severe the damage is expected to be from frosted turf. And I just say, well, there's another perspective. There's a part of the world where people are not so concerned about it. And I like to share that. And so in this blog post, an alternative reference for frost delays, I I shared this because Paul McCormick had tagged me in the tweet. So I'm bringing up that picture, and I will read his tweet. His tweet said, "This morning we tried an alternate approach to our first frost of the fall season from Asian turfgrass," that's me, "and went out anyway. Now it was only a rough frost, nothing on short grass, but previously we would have delayed." And then he said there were no issues at all. And he shows a picture of a nice frost on the rough at the golf course. So he tagged me in that, and then I thought, okay, let me, for anybody that is not familiar with why he tagged me, I said let me reshare some of the posts that I've had on this topic. So one of them is playing golf in the snow, more greenkeeping adventures from Japan. So I'll put a direct link to all of these posts. They're linked to in this post about the alternative reference for frost delays. And then in the follow-up post, how to lose 120 million yen with frost delays, I counted up the number of frosts that year based on historical weather data at the golf course where I was a superintendent in Japan. And I looked at the round numbers, and I realized that if we would have done those frost delays, it would have been about $1 million. And I show photos. I show what the damage was, and I also show how the turf looked in the spring. And there's some research from South Carolina that I wrote about in another post called "Fall Potassium and Winter Traffic on a Bent Grass Green." So all of these posts, I share information about research or observations that have been made about winter traffic on frosted turf or frozen turf. And then I put a picture up, and this is from a golf course that I was doing some consulting at in Japan. And I annotated that photo, and I showed a picture of a frost cover that's folded up. It had been used that evening, that night, so it would be put out in the late afternoon before sunset, and then it's removed in the morning so the golfers can go play at the scheduled time. And I wrote there that I said that covers are used as a service rather than as a grass protectant. And the frost covers are used specifically as a service to the golf players so that they can putt on unfrosted turf. And you mentioned to me in that conversation that we had on Twitter, you said that it's frost to you is an abnormal golf condition, and you really wouldn't want to putt on frosted turf because it's kind of like, putting through casual water or something. Nobody wants to putt through a puddle, and nobody wants to putt across frosted turf. And I agree with you, it's not an ideal way to play. But the way that this is done in Japan, as you'll see in this picture, this is the practice green in this case, but on some holes on the course that they know will have frost on the greens, or certainly around the hole location for the day, it would be common to put the frost cover so that there won't be frost, but people can certainly walk across the frosted turf to get to those areas, and then they can putt on an unfrosted area. So that's something that I have seen, and I realize that we don't need to be as precious as we are about frost delays. But I don't think this is a very popular opinion. But then you said, well, there are places in Myrtle Beach where maybe they're taking a similar approach, is saying if you want to go play golf, go ahead.
Correct. And it's the owners, are reliant on that revenue and yeah, so it's been that way for many years. And it was very obtuse to me early on, but the more I've learned and about greenkeeping and golf course maintenance and running a business of a golf course and how all the numbers work, it makes sense. I mean, like I told you in the messages, to me, playing on frost is an abnormal condition. You can play in casual water, right? I've seen golfers over the years play through puddles on greens. you can do that and not have damage, and it'll be fine. My perspective as a golfer, if I'm paying top dollar to play somewhere, I don't want to be told that I have to go out and play in frost. I'd rather wait until it melts off. I'd rather wait till it's a little bit warmer. But if you do this long enough, Micah, you understand that there's golfers out there that will play in any weather, in any conditions, no matter what. So if they're willing to step up and pay and play, then it's important for the overall health and profitability of the course to let them go.
Yeah, unless you're absolutely convinced or you're certain that the damage is going to be so severe that it's not worth letting them go play. And that's what I thought it was. I I would have thought at a previous time in my life that people walking across that frosted section of the green to get out to that area that had been covered to do their practice putting. I'm referring to the picture that I'm showing now. I would have thought that that would damage the grass irreparably, and we'd be looking at resodding or needing to touch it up with seed, or we'd have Poa annua invasion in the areas where the bent grass would have been thinned out or something. And what I've seen at many years, many properties, a lot of experience of this is that all those worst case scenarios, I just haven't seen them happen. So it's 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 something that is I don't know why, if you're running a golf course as a business, you wouldn't at least consider this. And I think a lot of people do allow this. They just don't advertise it so much, because I've talked at seminars in Oregon, for example, and I gave a talk at the Oregon Superintendents Association meeting in 2019, I think. And the topic of frost delays did come up, and it turned out, I remember specifically there were people from Eastmoreland Golf Course in Portland, and I believe it's Forest Hills, I think it's Forest Hills over a little bit west of Portland in Cornelius, Oregon. People from those courses mentioned that, yeah, they don't really do frost delays, if I remember our conversations correctly, and they don't really see damage, and the golfers are happy. But of course, there's not a lot of places that are sharing the type of information of, we don't have frost delays, we don't worry about it. But we do see a lot of information in the trade publications or in blog posts and on Twitter and so on about let's protect the turf at all costs. And I just think that it's nice to put that interesting, different way out there. And so I've talked about it some, and in the blog post, I put links, and I queued these up, three specific conversations that I've recently with people about frost delays. I queued those up at the proper time where we started talking about frost delays. So I talked with Dave Kubian in New Zealand. He's a golf course superintendent there, but he also has a PhD in plant biology, plant physiology. And so he has an interesting perspective on frost delays and the specific type of damage that may or may not occur. And I talked with Mr. Ichizono in Japan. He's a golf course superintendent at a golf course where they do allow play on frosted turf, and they do thousands of rounds. And he explains the damage that he does see. And I talked with Bjarni Hannesson, who is a golf course superintendent in Iceland, where they see frosts, basically, that they'd have the potential to see frost pretty much any month of the year. And they do see a lot of frost. And he talks about the types of damage that he's seen and the types of, what would we say, how he manages, if they allow traffic or not. So I would encourage anybody that's interested in this, please check out some of this, just to see how it's done in some interesting different parts of the world. And there's a blog post called "Playing Golf in Ice and Snow," which I linked to that one also. That one has more pictures and videos. It's got videos from Korea of big machines taking snow off of fairways in order to allow golf as soon as possible. So there's, yeah, it's a business, and it's it's interesting in the U.S. how people are tend to be, as I was, just protecting the grass at all costs, and possibly if you're the type of club that accepts revenue, accepts money for green fees, you might be turning away revenue. So I I just I'm interested in this in two ways, really. Just because it's so different from how I was taught and how I used to think and how I realize it's typically done in the U.S. As I saw how it's done differently in other parts of the world, I thought that's very interesting. And then also just to get the information out there, if you are a golf club somewhere in the world that is scared of frost delays because of what you've heard or what the standard recommendations are, maybe just think about it. If you would have golfers that want to pay money to play on frosted turf, you might be able to accept their money and not see too much damage.
Yeah, don't you think, Micah, that some of this came from when frost delays first came about in greenkeeping? I don't know when that was. I'm assuming it was in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or whenever. But a lot of clubs then were not daily fee revenue based. They were private, and they were making the same amount of money whether people came or not. So I think in today's world of golf, there is a lot more daily fee, resort, revenue driven type play. And maybe that's why it's gone by the wayside somewhat. Or it seems that where there's opportunity for people to do it and make money, they've tried it and gotten away with it. So
Yeah, and I guess you bring up the time when frost delays perhaps were implemented. There would have been less sand root zones also. So I think a sand root zone tends to be pretty stable under a frosted turf, but when you have a slightly frozen layer of soil and grass above a soil that could be wet and soft, then you can have a different kind of problem, which could be kind of shearing the plants, damaging the roots, separating the plants from the soil, and so on, which is certainly something to be concerned about when you have a frozen layer above an unfrozen layer. But on sand root zones, I think it would be rare to have the soil be so unstable that such a problem could occur. And what we see with modern golf courses, a lot of them, certainly the areas that get the most traffic, tend to have a sandy root zone, which you just have you have something that's pretty stable, whether it has ice involved or not.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's a good point. I should check some of my old books also and check some of the old USGA green section bulletin articles and so on from that era and see what they were saying about frost. But yeah, I had a lot of conversations, and I mentioned this in my conversation with Bjarni, which I put a link to in this post about the alternative reference for frost delays. I mentioned some of the conversations that I had at the Masters tournament, and golf course superintendents from the southeastern region of the U.S. were telling me that a lot of them are at private clubs. Their members are paying a lot of money to have perfect conditions or as perfect as possible, and their members want to play on unfrosted turf, and their members want to play on turf that is not damaged from somebody else who's played across frosted turf. So they have zero tolerance for risk, because that's what their members don't want, any risk, and their members are so happy to not play on the frosted turf. And that's not anything that I can argue with. And so in that situation, it makes complete sense to have frost delays. But if it's a situation that I got myself into in Japan, where we had, for example, in Japan, they do a two-way start. So on an 18-hole golf course, you'd have tee times on hole 1 and hole 10, and they do as many tee times as they can. And then as they switch, people stop for lunch, and they can have even more tee times as those people have stopped for lunch. And then they'll stop the tee times, and you do the crossover. So you tend to get a lot of people playing early in the morning. So you'd have like 3 hours of tee times off hole 1 and 3 hours of tee times off hole 10. And then you might have a little bit of tee times after that. But basically, everybody's playing in the morning and then they're going to go home. And people in Japan would make their tee times months in advance, perhaps, certainly weeks in advance. Nobody's just going to roll up to the club and expect to play because it's going to be booked, especially on a weekend. So I got myself into the situation of not really appreciating how that business model worked. And people are on tight schedules. They have trains that run on time and they may need to catch a train or have a meeting or so on. And they are not going, you just can't do a delay because people have arranged their schedule and then they're your guest for that day at the golf course. They want to have the golfing experience. So from the clubhouse perspective, from the owner's perspective, they want to have those 160 golfers or so who have all arranged their schedule to play golf at the time that they made the tee time. That needs to happen. And my role as the golf course superintendent, I was looking at it as I need to protect this grass. We're going to tell those 160 people to wait, but they can't wait because in that culture, in that country, you make a schedule and then you stick to it. And so the golfers are coming to the golf course with their schedule for the day already set. And I was throwing a big wrench into that and it just doesn't work. And yeah, it was a revelation to me that we didn't kill the greens that winter.
We do the double T system here in Myrtle Beach as well. Always have. So
Do you do the stop for lunch treatment also?
no, we don't do the stop. 5 minutes at the turn, Micah. That's all you get.
You have
But
to
we
come.
do the double T and always have. So another similarity between golf in Japan and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So
Yeah, and another similarity is the climate and the grass types.
yes,
You'd have a similar latitude there. Do you happen to know what latitude you're at? Are you
I believe
37 or?
I was going to say 36 and change is what we're at. Yeah. Yep.
And that's I think Tokyo's about 35, 36.
Yeah.
And so in the Tokyo area, in the Kanto Plain, there might be about 700 golf courses. There's a lot of golf courses within a couple hours of Tokyo, and they would typically have cool season grass on, typically be bent grass greens, and then
Yep.
warm season everywhere else, which I know historically was what you had in the Myrtle Beach area, I believe. So, and
Correct.
you still have some bent grass courses there?
We do have a few, with the ultra dwarf revolution, most have gone away, but 20 years ago there was probably more bent than Bermuda, but now it's shifted. If we have 100 courses in this area, maybe 5 or 6 of them have bent. So we used to have a couple with Seashore past Ballum, but that's gone away back to Bermuda. So yeah, it's a lot of similarity, especially when you get into ornamentals too. There's so many ornamentals that come from Asia that we have that we use here. So
Well, I I was hoping that I would be in Myrtle Beach this November, next month, for the Carolinas show. Are you on the board of the
I am.
Carolinas GCSA?
Yes, I am.
And I had been invited to attend, and I was looking forward to going to that show, which I've read about and seen pictures of and so on. I was hoping that I could do it, but I was also simultaneously invited to a series of other seminars in another part of the world. And due to the way the travel schedule works out and so on, I've not been able to make it, or I wasn't able to accept the invitation to the Carolinas show this year. But I'm hoping to do so in the future. when is that held? And
It,
is it sold out? Like how's it looking this year?
it's looking good. Yeah, it's going to be November 14th through the 16th. We traditionally have it in the third week of November, and we're hoping that you've cleared your calendar then in 2023, Micah, because we are going to re-extend the invitation, I believe, and we're hoping you will come.
Hopefully, I
But
don't
yeah,
have to talk. Yeah, hopefully, I don't have to talk about frost delays because uh, I'm afraid I'd get tarred and feathered talking about that. But maybe, yeah, it's good talking with you and realizing that there are people in Myrtle Beach that would realize that uh, I'm not crazy when I'm saying this. That yeah,
no,
you can actually put some traffic on frosted turf. So yeah, maybe
you
we could
can.
do a frost delay session.
I think you know, here in the southeast too, I think it's pretty common for even private clubs that once the turf achieves full dormancy, when the Bermuda grass is fully dormant, I think it's pretty common even at private clubs to allow play on frost if people are interested in doing that. I just don't think there's a high demand for it as is in some of the situations like we've talked about. Most people that are members at a club, I think, are going to want to wait until it's a little bit warmer because it's another consideration when playing in frost, Micah, is it's cold and it's
Yeah,
below my threshold for play.
yeah. Uh, I know Frank Rossi sometimes has Jim Copenhaver on his show. I think from Pellucid Golf, and they've talked about that golfable hours or golfable days or potential rounds based on weather index, and I think that's interesting. Of course, I think they keep that formula proprietary, but you have to wonder in different parts of the world whether there'd be a different definition of what golfable weather is. And if you see some of the links that I've put to photos and videos from Japan and Korea, you will see that what golfers in that part of the world consider golfable weather might be a little bit different. Where people in America would tend to only play golf in more clement weather. But you'll see, yeah. I mean, you can have snow, light snow, and in Japan you could have light snow and frost and frozen conditions, and you won't have people canceling. They're still rolling into the parking lot, expecting that if they haven't been notified that the course is closed because of snow or something, they're going to come play because they have a tee time.
We've had
And
that
in
too. Yep.
you have that
Yep.
too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We get snow here too, and we've allowed play with some snow still on the ground. I mean, there were 14 golfers here on Saturday morning after the hurricane that they were here and ready to play.
Oh man.
Yep,
Oh,
and
did you
we
have to
actually
turn
ended
them?
up we turned them away, but we opened later that day. We basically got the greens cleaned off and the cart pass clear and let them have it. They and many courses did that. Because again, these people are here on this is prime season, and they're here to play. And they were cooped up all day Friday because of the storm, and they want to play. They're our guests, and like you said, and it's important to accommodate, and especially when you involve lodging, when you're housing them too, it brings in different considerations. You know, having some staff on hand to feed them if that's part of their package, and they're here and they want to play, and um, let them. You have to let them go. Unfortunately, those 14 gentlemen had a second afternoon tee time at another course down the road, so they were planning 36 holes that day. So again, Mike, it's kind of like what you said with the trains. They had a schedule, and unfortunately, we were not ready to open for them to play, but they did get their second round in,
Oh,
as we had people playing in that afternoon.
good for them. Yeah, I
Yep.
I know right after a storm like that, safety is of course quite a concern, and you have to watch out for branches and other trees that may be in an unsafe condition and so on. So you can't
Yes.
really just let people out on the property. But it's nice that that you were able to get it ready by the afternoon. So,
Yep.
yeah, well, I really appreciate you joining me to talk about frost delays, and I hope some people will enjoy the perhaps an alternative perspective that they may not hear all the time. I don't think a lot of people are out there saying, yeah, I don't hear this viewpoint of maybe frost delays are overdone too often. It's like we, as an industry, we kind of keep it quiet because we might have a idea that that traffic on frost doesn't damage the grass too much, or we've all had that experience of the grass frosted up as we were out there with the mowers and we didn't see any damage and so on. But nobody really talks about it because you wouldn't want the golfing public to think that they could just go out and traipse all over a frosted golf course. And I know the golfing public doesn't listen to the ATC double cut, so we're at no risk of this information getting into, the golfing mainstream. But for the turfgrass managers who do listen to this, I I would like to see more people just test it a little bit. Go walk across the back of a green, uh, you know, make some big footprints on frosted turf and just see what happens. And unfortunately, I don't have a chance to do that very much because I'm in Bangkok and I forgot to turn on the air conditioner, which is probably good for the sound, but I've been sweating here because it's quite warm. And it there it never gets below 20 Celsius here, which is about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not even close to a frost in Bangkok or in southern Thailand where I live. It doesn't even get that cool. So I don't get a chance to play with this much anymore. But when I did live in places where there was frost, I did not go out and do any of those tests. And it wasn't until I was forced to do it by the owner saying, Micah, we are going to open, I'm in charge, the owner's in charge. It's not me that was really in charge. I don't have the power to close the golf course like I thought I did. And so I was forced to allow that traffic, and I put in writing that I didn't want it to happen just to, cover my perspective on that. But it turned out I was wrong. And in that case, we saw very minor damage, just a little bit of thinning. But the thinning, I think, was not so much from traffic on frosted turf as it was heavy traffic from all the golfers who were out there happy to play on turf that was growing slow because it was winter. And then as soon as it warmed up in the spring, the grass, we get the temperatures, we get the light, we get a little bit of fertilizer, the grass comes back maybe better than it was in the autumn. So what I'm saying is, if I was living in Canada or in Minnesota or in Oregon or in Yorkshire right now, I would play around just out of curiosity with putting my own traffic on some safe areas of frosted turf where maybe nobody would notice except for me and the maintenance staff, and just try to understand this a little bit more.
Well, thank you for your curiosity because it's helped us turf grass managers in many ways over the years. So kudos to you for that.
Well, thank you. Hopefully, I can continue to be curious, and hopefully, I can avoid spreading misinformation. So, I appreciate you letting me know that I'm not alone in thinking that allowing play or traffic on frosted turf may be possible in some situations. I appreciate hearing that, and when I do get it wrong, I hope you and any of the listeners and viewers will also let me know, because I must get it wrong sometimes too, and I certainly want to be corrected. And I've been wrong many times in the past, like with that frost issue that we've been talking about today. And if I get anything wrong, I'm happy to be corrected so that I can avoid spreading misinformation. So anyway, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks so much, Jim, for taking the time to talk with me today. Anything else before we sign off?
No, sir. Thank you for having me. It was an honor to be on the ATC Double Cut.
Well, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and sign off and be back again soon with another interesting turfgrass topic to discuss. For ATC from Bangkok, Thailand, I am Micah Woods. Thanks for listening.